All right, so we're going to talk about managing risk, and we'll get into some specifics about risk assessments. And a lot of times people use a lot of these words interchangeably. So this is a big deal. Every day, each one of us that's on the videos or online right now, either listening or participating in this, we take big risk. And first and foremost is probably turning over the car engine and putting it in reverse. Really, driving a car is one of the most dangerous things that we can ever do. And when you throw in some of these idiots that are out there that are trying to put the guys over that they're not actually texting while driving, and those people are on the same roads that we are, it becomes even more of a risk. So this is such a huge topic that insurance industries, healthcare, and finance, computer science, all the way through marketing and even into biology. It's really across the board. We manage risk in a way, and I think that for me, this is one of the most important things about information security is how well we can manage risk. So really, it starts off with some pretty cool concepts here, and we're going to get into some of my silly little drawings that I'll put up on the overhead here, and we'll talk about it. But basically, here's the principles, the foundation that we're going to get into. And many of you that have been in the business for a while probably have seen or heard a lot of these before, but we're going to break it down and show you what's on the exam, and hopefully put you in a position that when you see questions specifically relating to this domain or this subdomain in the common body of knowledge, that the likelihood and or the probability of you passing is then mitigated. And specifically, now you could have a residual risk. So I'm trying to play around with some of these words that we're going to be talking about here. So interestingly enough, and how apropos for the timeliness of it, that the Department of Defense has officially decided to nix the word information assurance. And how good is the timing for someone who has gone out and thrown a trademark with the U.S. Patents Office on got cyber? Because now, instead of information assurance, we're putting different lipstick on that pig and calling it cybersecurity. And you can see here, this is actually from the risk management framework within the DoD, Department of Defense, that now we are going to be officially calling the whole group of information in and around protection and defense, cybersecurity, instead of information assurance. So a big definition down here at the bottom that really encompasses everything under the sun, and it gets into talking about damage, anything on the wires, wireless, and also starts to get into our holy trinity of the CIA triad, which, if you recall, one of the earlier lessons, we started to talk about that, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So do you got cyber? Well, by the end of this course, you definitely will have some. So one of the most important things is to try to figure out what you have. And in order for you to figure out what kind of risk you have to know what assets you have. Specifically, if you are in the business to try to do, let's say, a risk assessment, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, one of the interesting things is if we don't know what assets that we have in the organization, we can't officially do that risk assessment, because the risk assessment in itself deals with things like threats and vulnerabilities, and really starts to massage it to go and find the impacts of any loss to either information or the loss to capabilities or anything along those lines. So the word that you oftentimes will see thrown out in whenever you start to get into company assets and putting them in different groups like administrative, technical, and physical controls is a word called vulnerability. And this is really the crutch of everything that we do is we're trying to put controls in place to fix those weaknesses that can be exploited by a threat. And that is what a vulnerability is. So somebody give me an example and open up your mic and talk to me here to make sure that I know that you're not asleep. Give me an example of a physical security control.
Door lock.
Door lock. There we go. That's easy enough. Very good. So what about a gate? What about um, a moat? Um, how about something along the lines of anything like a fence or something like that, So those are the types of buckets that we can pop into a physical type of control for security controls. And specifically to try to protect our assets, we can put those things that we just mentioned in there. What about an administrative control? What is that? Give me an idea of what that is. Nobody wants to take a crack at that, huh? How about something like a policy or possibly a procedure? Those could be an administrative control. Think about that porn site that you were viewing at work the other day and how that administrative control may have been decreed that, hey, when I sign in, everything you do after the sign in now becomes the property of the organization you're working for. And herein lies the problem because a lot of times now we're seeing the convergence between the logical and physical controls that are managed by administrative controls. So the technical controls obviously is probably the easiest of these, but it really becomes a well-oiled machine between the three, and they work very, very well together. So, and when we talk about this thing called a model, I mean, the security model, it really comes down to what's important to you. And as a business owner or as a property owner or anything that's important to you in life, not necessarily just cyber or information security, but what's important to you, how do you protect that thing? If you have a nice big pile of gold bullion that's sitting in your living room at your house, that's probably pretty important to you. So, do you maybe go get a couple of Doberman Pinschers or some pit bulls? You got a couple of nice shotguns. What about putting maybe some security cameras around and hiring a security guard? But those are the types of things to think about. And really, it comes down to how much money do you have to put and invest into coming up with protecting that asset in the long run. And it comes down to these neat concepts. So trying to figure out what uh, the specific risk is to an organization gets us involved with this idea of a business impact assessment, this BIA. And it's a type of a risk assessment that you work with all the different parts of the organization to come up with scenarios and situations that may present itself. Then the organization, based off of those situations, can make intelligent decisions on maybe how to respond or mitigate to those sorts of things. I remember when I was in Florida, I was down there for a good part of my life, and one of the problems that we have down there is hurricanes. And living in the Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater area for many, many moons, it becomes kind of a second nature that for everybody down there, that the cone of uncertainty from a hurricane really puts you at least 2 days out before you really know if that thing's coming, and you have to hunker down. So when something like that is coming, there is a residual risk. There's definitely ominous with the weather and the clouds. You can see it coming from a distance. You kind of feel it. It's eerie. But then from a company's perspective, or even your personal perspective, you come up with different things that you need to put into factors, and those are: how much do things cost? If I buy something, what's going to be the benefit of that? And what happens if I lose it altogether? And those are super important because sometimes the cost outweighs the benefit, and there's no need to even go and try to mitigate anything in that particular case. But you could also have another scenario where maybe it does, and that's the more realistic one with this. And so far, everything that I've talked to you about, you will absolutely see on the exam. And you can bet that at least 7 to 10 questions will be in or around everything that we talked about with risk assessments, business impact assessments, vulnerabilities, threats, um, likelihood, and going through and assessing risk are all things specifically that you will see on the exam. So keep that in mind whenever you're going through and preparing for this. So one of the key components is to managing or mitigating risk is this concept of change control. And I can kind of, even though you don't have your video cameras on right now, and I don't see you in person, I can tell you what people normally do when we're teaching these live boot camps. Whenever we start talking about change control or CCBs, change control boards, or change management, people either start to fall asleep and hit their head on the table in front of them, or they roll their eyes and they're just like, oh, well, why do we even need to do this? Well, you put these in place to keep the honest man honest. And for our perspective here, each one of these is something that is important to a well-defined, robust implementation of processes, procedures, policies at a business. And specifically, you talk a little bit about the two middle ones here, the change request system and configuration management. The number one issue that we see typically when we're going out and doing assessments, whether on the commercial side or on the DoD side, is somebody making a configuration change to a firewall or a PC, or I don't know, something that flies up in the air that's automated. They make a change that's been unapproved and they don't tell anybody. Well, if you make a change and something breaks and there's no record that that change has been made, then you're going to be like the Tasmanian devil and chasing your tail around trying to figure out what in the heck happened. Hey, it's the same configuration that I did yesterday, and why is it not working? Well, let me give you an example. When I was at NASA, we did an agency-wide rollout of a smart card system, and the 16 centers, we led the effort here at Marshall Space Flight Center and pushed it out to all the other centers agency-wide. And specifically, we had to actually go through the change request system to get approval from the customer to not only do the work to maybe code or engineer the system in a way that was either sexier to the users or the consumers, but also to be approved to actually do the work. And a boss of mine, a mentor of mine, said, "Hey, you shouldn't necessarily look at these change requests as as bad things. And oh, by the way, when we rolled out this massive enterprise-wide system to over 90,000 people, we had within the first month of production, we had over 700 change requests. Thank goodness that we had configuration management in place and separation of duties where the developers could not also push the code into production. You actually had that person, that middleman in between, that had to be the gatekeeper. They were the person that was in charge of sitting on that change request until it comes back from the customer. And that's all defined within certain procedurals or procedures, as well as maybe some policies that are dictated from on high. So, it's important that you spend some time on these. And, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I'd say that every one of these terms right here will be on your exam. So if you've been around the DoD or business for a long time, I think that this is one of the easier topics for us to talk about here. The one that you always see in the James Bond movies or the Jason Bourne or any of the Harrison Ford movies. It seems like, or at least the old ones, that it's always top secret, and that's the highest level that we can possibly have of a particular type of information. And it kind of goes from there and spatially diffuses down. Now, it's quite clever, some of the cool things that you can do with classification of information. And on the flip side of that, you can also give misinformation. And I think that some of our adversaries are very good at using America's way to try to disseminate information as quickly as possible. Our adversaries are becoming aware of that, or have been aware of that, and have started to feed and will continue to feed misinformation of that. At a general level here, if you were for your exam, if you already do not know what these data classification levels are, you'll definitely have a question on your exam. It'll either be one question or two questions, just asking, put these in order. Which one is the highest level of security, which one's the lowest level of security. So spend some time reviewing this whenever you're going through and trying to prepare for the exam. So one of the cool things that we're seeing is, and I'm going to do a demo here so you can pay attention if you want, and I sure hope that you have a live browser session that you can follow along with me. But essentially, we're going to go through and play around with a couple of tools and figure out who we're dealing with. Now, what I'll do is I'll actually shut off the record, and that way we don't throw anybody under the bus. But I am going to need a huckleberry for that, and somebody's going to volunteer for me. And if you don't, then I'm going to volunteer somebody. So we need to know who we're dealing with here. And that goes into the SF-86, so special form or standard form 86, which is a background investigation. But you can also, pay for, credit check or, just simple background investigation by a private investigator. Those are pretty prevalent out on the interwebs, and you can go and find those. You have people sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, that says that, hey, everything that we're going to be doing here while you're working with us, you're not supposed to tell anybody about it. And even though that should be common stay for most folks, that hey, don't give people information and put yourself out of a job because now somebody else has got that information. There's probably some sort of employment agreement that you're going through and doing this. And then the last two, you see that last bullet there rear its ugly head, and it just keeps coming and beating us up, the separation of duties. that is so important within an organization. I have a pretty good story here that I'm going to tell about the hiring and termination. When I was working for a financial company down in the St. Petersburg area, I was um, around this time of the year, beginning of March, down in that area, that is when the Grapefruit League starts up. And that specifically means spring training. And for all you baseball fans out there, you probably know what I'm talking about. Um, the state of Florida, the state of Arizona, in the month of March is lit up like a Christmas tree with baseball games going on left and right all over the place. And so, me being a baseball fan, it was very difficult, before I was married and had kids, to get anything done at any job in the month of March. And so, what I ended up doing is, I'd get tickets to go see the Cardinals play down in St. Pete, or, see the Yankees play over in Tampa, or see the Phillies play over in Clearwater, to the Blue Jays play in Dunedin. Um, but I remember there's one time I was down at a park down in downtown St. Petersburg, and at that time, around the 2000 time, maybe 99, I don't recall off the top of my head, I was in charge of, on the network security team, I was in charge of access control, and specifically shutting people's access off. And when you're dealing with a Goliath um, financial institution, um, that could be pretty big deal. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that Barney Big Dog is a stock trader with the company, and he's got $100 million portfolio. Well, Barney decides that it's time for him to leave said company and take his book of business over to a competitor. Well, when we get wind of that, there needs to be something in place that we can lickety split shut that dude's access down. So then he cannot take everything that was on his computer and essentially steal it and move over to the new place. Now, we're seeing this with BYOD, the Bring Your Own Device initiative, where essentially it's like the BlackBerry kill pill that a lot of organizations are forcing their employees to say, hey, if you're going to get email from our company on your mobile device, if you leave the company, then we reserve the right to wipe your device remotely. Now, whether or not you agree with that, I don't think employers care. I mean, that's really the rules, and you either accept it or you don't. This particular case, I remember I was having a good old time at Al Lang Stadium in St. Petersburg, and having a couple of tasty beverages up in the good seats, and all of a sudden, I get a phone call. And the process was, immediately when you got a phone call, the person would identify themselves, and then they would say, hey, I got an urgent termination. And I'm sitting in the middle of a baseball game, starting to get my groove on, and then all of a sudden, I get an urgent termination phone call. And the risk management idea or ideology comes into play there. Immediately, that was my job, or one of my jobs, to be the person, the Huckleberry, on call to go and disable that person's account. So that's what I was getting paid for. So what I ended up doing is, I ended up going out to my car. At that time, I couldn't tether it to my device, but there was conveniently a Starbucks in town, and very, very close. And I went to the nearest Starbucks and actually just stood out in the parking lot there and brought up my phone, jumped on their internet, and within about 6 or 7 minutes, which was well within the termination procedure guidelines. I think it had to be less than 20 minutes. I was able to go and do everything remotely. So in that particular case, that urgent termination came into play. And people have those types of things or techniques that they do for employment, either coming on or coming off. Another thing for any young folks that are on the line, and that we're seeing from an employer's perspective, from any of the social media. whenever we're going through and hiring people now, HR, human resources will go out and check Facebook, check LinkedIn, check Twitter, and anything else, Dr. Google. They'll go out and just cruise the internet and see if we can find anything. And one of the interesting things is that a lot of the young folks, the millennials, I think that they think that the stuff that they post won't actually show up whenever a potential employer is going out and doing a quick check on that person. So those bong tokes or those keg stands that they were doing last night that they just stupidly popped up there on the internet, now pops up on that HR page and that search, and maybe the discriminator that does not allow them to get that job. So you definitely need to know who you're dealing with whenever you're going through and hiring or firing folks, and it begins with background checks and follows the scent of doing specific things with your processes and procedures in place. So I'm going to stop the video here. Hold on a second.